Oh, hey Nick, how are you?
Hey, Han, good to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm very well. You know what? I just had a camera snafu, and I lost the camera and I had to replug it in. So I hope that wasn't like too disturbing for everybody. But
We can
great
speak
to
in your
be
kitchen as well.
Yeah, but great to be having a conversation with you, Nick. Everybody, we're going to be talking about hiring, especially if you're a veteran of hiring. And I hope Nick doesn't mind me saying that he is one of the venerable silver foxes of the tech world, having been an engineer for many years now, and also a manager of at many years. So you've hired in different contexts, you've hired people in different teams, you've worked in corporate, you've worked in startup, you've used different methodologies to hire. And today we're going to be having a chat with Nick to try and figure out what lessons he's learned from doing this very hard part of the job. So we've got 20 minutes, folks, with this conversation. If you have any questions that you want to ask Nick, please do pop them in the question function down there, and we'll get to them shortly. So Nick, just quickly, I wanted to let's start off with some intros. Can you intro yourself real quick? Who are you? What it is you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Nick. These days, I do interim work. So I help teams on a part-time basis. Usually, that is as some sort of engineering lead while they're hiring a permanent CTO. Or VP of engineering, also do a bit of consultancy work. But previously, I mean, at the very start of my career, I was with a web agency, actually the UK's first internet, dedicated internet web agency. I was with them for 8 years, and then I led the software development team at the Guardian for 8 years. So, as a permanent person, I've done an awful lot of hiring, and then as an interim person, I've seen. The inside of lots and lots of different kinds of organizations. As you've said, my first job was explaining to people what the internet was and what the difference was between the internet and the web, and that's not a job anymore.
Yeah, fantastic. You aged yourself with some of those comments right there, Nick. But it's great to have this level of experience, because a lot of the people in the audience here might have been engineers that have stepped up to the leadership position for the first time, and may not have like years and years of experience of hiring others, or may have had some experience of hiring people that haven't worked out. And that can be one of the most painful kind of outcomes or mistakes that you can make. So let's start with that, Nick. Let's start with some of those mistakes. Like what has been, if you scroll back, what has been the most disappointing hire you've made,
So,
and
so
what
yeah.
did you learn from that?
So that's a really interesting. There is, when you ask that question, there's one hire that haunted me for years. I mean, literally years. I was working with a smallish company. There's sort of about 70, 80 people, and we were hiring for a team lead, an engineer. And it was my first few weeks there, and I was invited into the interview process because I would be this person's line manager. And this person actually was great. They were fabulous. They knew their tech. We'd already established that, and I was sort of in for the what they call the soft interview stage with one of my colleagues, just talking generally about their work, and they ticked so many boxes. Well, I remember particularly. They talked about wanting to deliver not just software, but they wanted to deliver value to customers, and that got a big tick in my sort of mental checkbox. And we hired this guy, and he just didn't get on with people. He didn't get on with the team. He was still brilliant. He was still incredibly perceptive, incredibly smart, had very high standards in his code, but he wanted to do things in a way with so much more rigor than we were able or willing to do in our 70-person company. He'd come from a previously large organization, and it was very, very frustrating saying, look, we're just a little bit more relaxed here about the way we do it. We don't have processes for everything. If someone doesn't do something, that's fine. You don't, just have a conversation with them. You don't need to reject it outright. And we were in a crunch project as well. So he was leading a team. And at the end of his probation period, even though he wasn't getting on so great with the team, I wanted him to stay, but he said no. So I've already got another job. So he knew it wasn't working either, and it bothered me for years because he was he was clearly terrific. He clearly cared about customers. He clearly was a fabulous engineer, and I kept asking myself for a long time afterwards, what question could I have asked him that would have revealed that he wasn't going to be a great fit for us? And it was only in the last few months I suddenly realised it wasn't necessarily a question that I could have asked him, but I could have been honest and transparent, honest with myself and honest with him about our culture at the company. And I think that's what we didn't establish. We talked to him as if every engineer was going to fit our company, not just just by asking this question, this question, this question. And if you answer these questions, then you're right for us. But one thing I've definitely learned in recent years is you're not hiring the best developers, you're not hiring the best people, you're hiring the best people who fit for your organization. And so I think we didn't ask ourselves hard enough questions about our culture, our strengths and weaknesses, what made us special, what made us different. And we weren't honest with him enough at all. And I think if we'd have been more honest, we might have stood a better chance of either one of us saying, do you know what? We're not right for each other. I still think he was a fantastic person, but just wasn't the right fit. But it took me ages to work that one out.
How long did it take you? How long was this sort of hanging over you? You mentioned the word haunting, Nick. But
Easily about 3 or 4 years, because that was such an important project for us, and it was such an intense period. So everything is sort of in my memory in such bright colours in my head. The really interesting thing was, although we needed all the people we could get for that particular project, and he left, he left as a team lead at a crucial point, the team still managed to deliver the project on time, even though they'd lost their lead. And that just, I think, goes again to show how important the culture fit is, and how costly actually a culture misfit is as well.
Yeah. So folks, does that resonate with you? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts here. Did you, or have you hired someone who, was clearly an exceptional candidate, but their standards were simply out of sync, or their method of work was simply out of sync with how you operated right at this point? And therefore they became inevitably a difficult cog in the wheel. It simply was too much friction in that situation. I'm sure it does resonate, because it's hard to say no to an exceptional candidate, isn't it? When you've seen the resume, you've seen the work, you're doing the interviewing, clearly this person is excellent. You might have an aspiration at some point to get to a level where, yes, of course, we will have all of these quality controls and procedures in place, but it was fairly to recognize that that's not where you were as a business at that point. And there was a need to do type of situation. There was an urgent project that needed to get going, and this was the immediate requirement this person needed to lead upon.
And I think when you are excited about somebody, it's easy to get carried away like that. And one of the other things, looking back on, how my approach to interviews has changed. Also, the companies I've worked with, how their approach has changed over the years. It used to be the way that after an interview, I would get together with the other interviewers and we would confer and make a decision. And in more recent years, there has been a consistent tendency for everyone to go away and independently write down their views of the candidate at their particular stage. And only when everyone has written down what their view is, then you come together. And there's much less of an opportunity for groupthink, or one particularly sort of sort of influential person sort of guiding the rest of the time. And I remember another, I'm clearly coming out terribly in this conversation, because it's all about my mistakes and so forth, but another really disappointing hire was someone who again was a lead for a team, who I thought was great, and one of the people I spoke to said, "Well, he clearly has the tech skills, but I honestly did in the conversation we had, I honestly didn't see anything that showed that he was a good leader of people. Like, oh no, it'll be fine, it'll be great. We hired him, and he didn't work out. And I should have listened to that manager, and I should have weighed all those views equally and created them independently."
Yeah, very, very good. Don't feel bad, Nick, because you can't work in any type of scenario over decades and not make decisions where you wouldn't want to do better in future. But I think it's firstly, let's deal with the one of the great lessons that you've just put into play here, which is that sort of feedback should be independently recorded before discussion. I hope everyone's familiar with this idea. It's actually becoming like very much consensus within the recruiting space. One of the worst things you could do is have that discussion before any kind of individual record is taken, because of course people's minds will be changeable, and you don't actually want that to happen. There should be no kind of concept where people are persuaded at that juncture. This is where a scorecard becomes handy. Some sort of formalization of how you score this person. I guess in future, you might want to have a strong awareness as to where your coding culture currently is, so that you know what the compatibility might be for the new hires that come in. And this is not to say someone who has different sort of methods is necessarily bad. That's simply to be aware that if this person does have different methods, that's going to take you some more time before you'll be able to acclimate to each other to get to that point. And it may well be that you don't have the time to do that in that context. There's certain situations where you just need someone who's going to operate very much in sync with how you operate, and you don't have the time to bring that person on board. Or even, if this person is designed to up level your team, you don't have the time to get there at that particular situation. So it's very much contextual driven. Nick, you've already talked about lessons learned. One of them was how do you collect feedback, which is to do it independently before you come together with a scorecard. What other sort of recommendations or lessons might you be able to offer the audience from your experience of recruiting people?
I think one of the things I have learnt in recent years, and to be honest, that might have just been sort of because of personal circumstances, is also to be much more sensitive to individuals' personal circumstances. So I know for example, in the very, very early days of my hiring, and we were a young company, and it was the dot-com boom, which was a thing one time, and quite an aggressive company, and we always looked very favourably, or almost expected people to have open source projects, for example. Or we expected them to do long sort of coding exercise. And these days, partly because I've had a child and have a life and so forth, suddenly you think, well, actually, maybe that's just not possible for some people. Maybe they finish at the end of the day and they absolutely have no time to start up their own coding project because they've got a kid at school or someone who's sick, or they've got to help someone down the road, or whatever that is. And so you've got to sort of separate out the skills you need from the lives outside the work there, and that's really, really important.
Nick, that's such a great example, because I think all of us in the audience here are very familiar with the lack of diversity within the tech world, and there's lots of reasons why that may be, but there's also things that we were introducing to the recruiting process which might exacerbate that. And I remember very early on when I was doing a lot of tech recruiting for this tech startup, I had a conversation with, a great candidate who didn't have any open source sort of stuff out there. He didn't have it. And I struggled to get this person, get the existing technical team to consider this person, because they all had sort of all of these amazing projects that were running, great sidelines and all the rest of it. Of course, this person turned out to be a father of 3 kids. And he simply said, look, I'm doing like working really hard for this big company. When I'm finished, I want to spend time with my children. I don't have time to just launch this other project. And that was like a revelation to me at the time. I thought, wow, that's super interesting. What I didn't understand, but I understand now, is that this suddenly has huge implications for DE&I, because, of course, childcare is predominantly still a female majority responsibility. So if we've pegged our sort of how we assess a good engineer based on how much how many stars they have on their GitHub repos, guess what? You're going to end up hiring a lot of single male engineers. That's basically what's going to happen if that's how you kind of peg your assessment in terms of how it is. So you've got to introduce the whole person into the process, which is very difficult to do because recruiting is inherently an exercise in reduction. We don't have the time to sit there and fully process this person 360 degrees, etc. We have to take signals, but be aware that some of the signals you're taking will in fact advantage certain types of people given their own life circumstances. So super important lesson.
Yeah, and I would also say to sort of build on that, and also to sort of almost test yourself. It is one of the things I realised that was sort of had a double value early on, was giving really specific, precise feedback to the recruiters, but usually recruiters that I work with, because it's really easy to say no. It's really easy to say, just a short sort of 2 sentences. Sorry, didn't work out. But if you take time, and initially this is very, very difficult to do, I found, but if you take time to think, why was it I think they were vague? Why was it I think they were not a culture fit, which is a strange, nebulous kind of phrase. Let's be really specific. Let's be really concrete. I had to interrogate myself a lot of the time about why I thought this thing about that person. Then I had to write it down, and then I had to read it back and make sure that what I've written down did not seem inappropriate, could be looked at by an independent third party and say, yeah, this person is fair and not, biased in some kind of a offensive way. And that really teaches you to ask yourself, what is it that I'm looking for in the candidate, rather than rely on lazy sort of cliches in your head about what you're expecting. So actually writing things down, being really, really specific, to the extent that a third party could judge it and say, yes, you're fair. I think that's been hugely helpful to me as well.
That's a great test as well. Like, kind of third party read this feedback and actually understand the motivations for your decision. That's a really good test for everybody, every manager, everybody who's going ahead and hiring people. A really interesting and valuable test to put in for yourself. Because it is very easy. You're in a position of power after all. You can say yes, no, maybe to any of these people. Very easy for you to say, oh, that person wasn't strong enough, quote unquote. But what does that exactly mean? This doesn't help anybody get better at getting to the right person or the right fit for the role. And it may well be just disguising some biases that you have in your thinking, which needs to be exposed, because those things might handicap you to hiring as efficiently as you could otherwise do. Okay, Nick, we're running towards the end of time, but I think we've got time to throw another sort of final lesson to the audience here before we handle any Q&A. Do you have one more lesson for us? You've already given us some amazing ones. One more lesson from your years of hiring software engineers.
Yeah, I think, the other thing I would say is that you can't rely on the excitement you have for your own company. Unfortunately, everybody thinks their company is great, which is plausibly true, but you're not necessarily greater than all the other companies, because candidates these days, of course, have so many options, and you can't be persuaded by your own love of your own company. So I think you have to be honest with yourself and just show your organization as you really are, and just hope, as I said at the beginning, that you're not looking for the best candidate, but you're looking for the best fit. So say, this is who we are. We are trying to be honest about ourselves. If you think you're the great fit, for us, and we think you're the great fit, then that's lovely. Everyone thinks they're special, which they kind of are, but unfortunately, everybody's great in their different ways, and candidates have so many great options these days.
That's a really good line to think about, folks. Every company is great in their own way, and actually, I think every person is probably great in their own way. What we need to do is understand what those ways are, and that will really help us save a lot of pain and hassle if we really got to the truth of all of that. And in fact, being technically precise with describing what those ways are will help us do that. Okay, Nick, I think that's the end of our sort of the conversational part of it. I believe there's room for us to take Q&A, which I suspect I'm going to do that. I can't remember whether Zoe's going to try this, but maybe I should just take on some of these questions.
Sure.
Do you see these questions as well, Nick? Yeah, you see them? We'll just take. Okay, so by the way, folks, as we're dealing with these questions, feel free to ask some more. We're going to stay on here until Zoe kicks us off, basically. So first one from Jay. Jay saying, okay, recently I watched a presentation about the idea of culture add over culture fit to make our industry more inclusive. Instead of perpetuating the same profile, wouldn't this person add to your culture? So this is an interesting sort of conversation. It's very common to have in the recruiting space, culture fit versus culture add. We talk very strongly about culture fit, particularly with the example of the sort of excessively high standard engineer. Would this person not be culture add, Nick? Like, why was this problematic?
That's a really, really interesting question. I have a book on my shelf by a guy called Patrick Lencioni called The Advantage, which is a terrific book. And he talks about value, cultural values or other kinds of values. And he talks about being honest about your, the things you value in your company, whether it's, which is your culture. And you've got to put them into three categories, which is sort of things we have, cultural aspects that we have and want to keep, cultural aspects that we want to get rid of, and cultural aspects that we want to adopt. And those are three categories. So get rid of, keep, and adopt. And I think as long as you're clear yourself about what you want to do, where you want your culture to go, where you want your values to go, then you're right. If you identify a person with a cultural value which is going to take you in the right direction, then that absolutely makes sense. I think it's got to be a conscious thing, though, rather than, oh yes, this could be good for us. So that's how I would.
No, I think that's a great answer. Basically, you have to elevate it. You got to elevate it out from being a subconscious thing into a conscious thing, and again, be clear on what you mean by culture before you can go ahead and recruit against it. Okay, I think that's about it. I've just got a bee in my ear to tell me wrap this up and get off. So, folks, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been a wonderful conversation with Nick Silva. Please do connect with Nick, by the way, wherever he's online. I think he's a very smart guy and a lot to add to the conversation when it comes to hiring engineers. Thank you so much for watching, everybody.
Thank you, Han. Thanks, everyone.